All right, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to, first of all, thank Roger Hertog for his generosity for making all of this possible. And this, is not just this lecture series, it's a research program, it's a lot of things. I encourage you to look at our website and see everything we're up to. I want to also thank the Arnold Saltzman Institute for co-sponsoring this lecture series, and also for the School of International and Public Affairs for providing this beautiful venue. So thank you, and thank you all for coming. And thank you to Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. She's the State Department's coordinator for threat reduction, and it's a big job, as we've been learning over the course of this summer, as many of you already know. But if there's anybody who can do it, I think it's Bonnie. She has one of these resumes that makes you feel insecure about yourself. And of course, it's not just a resume, but let me just rattle off a couple of these things because it's really amazing. She has law degrees from Georgetown and SUNY Albany. She has her PhD in international relations from UVA. She had her BA in Amherst. And that's the least of it. She also recently retired as a lieutenant commander from the U.S. Naval Reserve. She also, in the course of doing this and many other things, she periodically has been deployed. Most recently, she spent a year being deployed to CENTCOM. For 9 years, she was a legal advisor at the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, where she advised diplomats and negotiating teams on a whole range of international treaty negotiations. In addition to that, she was on the staff of the 9/11 Commission. There she was in the lead in assessing how it is the Department of Defense dealt with al-Qaeda and military plans in dealing with al-Qaeda. She played a key role in that report. And after that, for 4 years, she was the head of U.S. foreign and security policy programs at the Ford Foundation. So she did all of this before she took up this position as ambassador for threat reduction coordination at the State Department. And for all these reasons, I think she's really a wonderful addition to this program. So thank you so much, Ambassador Jenkins, for coming, and thank you all for being here. So over to you, Bonnie.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. And I can tell I'm in 2010 with technology because I have the PowerPoint slides over there, I have this computer over here, I have notes over here, so I hope I can put it all together for you into a coherent presentation. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I started my position in June last year, so I've been there about a year so far. And I think one of the things that I find most interesting is just how much the U.S. government is doing in the area of cooperative threat reduction programs. I'm going to be going through a number of the programs that we're doing right now in the U.S. government and some of our international efforts, and you'll get a flavor of all the different things we're doing to try to ensure that weapons of mass destruction do not fall in the hands of non-state actors and terrorists. And I welcome your questions afterwards on any of the programs that we're doing. I got to keep track of what's going on up here. As probably some of you know, after the Soviet Union fell apart in 1990, there was a new threat that was facing the global community. We were facing a large weapons of mass destruction, or WMD infrastructure of the former Soviet Union that was now a problem to us in a very different way. You had Russia and 3 newly independent states, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, that emerged and inherited weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons from the Soviet Union. A lot of these nuclear weapons were not secure. There was a concern about potential insider theft and outside theft, of course. And there were threats posed by the fact that you had scientists with WMD knowledge who were unemployed and could be sold to the highest bidder for their knowledge. So there was an immediate solution that was required, and we needed innovative thinking and significant funding to address what were these new threats. Fortunately, Senator Nunn and Senator Lugar recognized the importance of this issue and importance of this new threat. And in November of 1991, both Senator Nunn and Lugar authored the NunnLugar Act, which established the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which began in 1992. The original purpose of NunnLugar is to secure and dismantle weapons of mass destruction and their associated infrastructure in the former Soviet states. It has provided funding since 1992 and expertise for states in the former Soviet Union to decommission nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons stockpiles under disarmament treaties. For example, nuclear weapons have been removed from their delivery vehicles, then decommissioned or stockpiled at designated sites in Russia. It has destroyed and decommissioned these missiles, helping to ensure the security and safety of nuclear weapons and storage. And it has also secured nuclear material in civilian facilities, including radioactive sources. And very importantly, it has engaged scientists with WMD applicable expertise into other non-threatening careers. As examples of the NunnLugar successes, and you can go to the NunnLugar site. If you go to Senator Lugar's webpage, you'll find all of this. He keeps a scorecard of all of his successes, all of the successes from the CTR program. And you will find that it says that 7,527 strategic nuclear warheads have been deactivated, 774 intercontinental ballistic missiles have been destroyed, 498 intercontinental ballistic missiles have been eliminated, no silos have been eliminated, 156 ICBM mobile launchers have been destroyed, 651 submarine-launched ballistic missiles have been eliminated, 476 submarine-launched ballistic missile launchers have been eliminated, 194 test tunnels, nuclear test tunnels have been eliminated, 471 nuclear weapons transport train shipments have been secured, and there's more. Of course, the focus of CTR has been on states in the past because it was Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus that inherited the nuclear weapons. Therefore, all the programs were focused on the state level. The threat that existed was understood. There had to be strong efforts to destroy the weapons that were out there, and necessary funding was provided. The programs, particularly those destroying missiles, for example, could be easily measured in terms of their effect and how to count them. There was a visible showing of what was being done. The CTR programs were initially led by 3 departments in the government. The Department of Defense, which did a lot of the destroying and decommissioning of missiles, nuclear warheads, and the security and safety of nuclear weapons and storage. The Department of Energy did a lot of work in securing nuclear materials in civilian facilities, including radioactive sources. And the Department of State was engaged in engaging scientists with WMD applicable expertise. Next slide. I think I'm ahead. Okay. However, today, there's a recognition that the threat has evolved. You still have the threat in the former Soviet Union that continues. However, the threat today is no longer predominantly against states. Therefore, we need to emphasize programs that focus on non-state actors and terrorists. The WMD threat today is global. It's no longer Russia and the former Soviet Union, and there are global actors. The threat is more diffuse and no longer just within specific areas. The new threat of nuclear terrorism exists now, but there's also a new threat of bioterrorism and new challenges raised by this new type of threat. The threat is different in terms of the objects of concern. It's no longer just large facilities, large submarines, but you're talking about countries around the world, biosites, biopathogens, and borders. You have to secure the borders. As a result, today's CTR efforts in combating emerging WMD threats have had to change. There are a number of recurring themes that underlie a lot of the CTR activities of today. As I said, there's a global focus. New partnerships. More countries are engaged. It's no longer just the United States and the United Kingdom, but a lot more countries are engaged in the efforts. Partnerships. We use the word partner a lot in our work with other countries. The activities are threat-driven around the world. The activities go where the threats exist. There are a number of different platforms that have been created to address these threats, whether you're talking about the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, the Proliferation Security Initiative, Security Council resolutions. All of these I'll go through. There's increasing international efforts and increasing need to work together to address these threats. You see a lot more efforts on regional activities. focusing on developing centers of excellence in different parts of the world. There's a need to work with more actors, NGOs, industry, think tanks, and international organizations like the WHO. This year, in 2010, there's been new legislation that was passed by Senator Lugar to address these new threats for the Department of Defense, because right now, up to this point, the Department of Defense has only been able to address threats in Russia and the former Soviet Union, whereas the Department of Energy and the Department of State has been working outside those areas for a while. Senator Lugar has stated that the CTR program is well positioned to enter a new phase of global security engagement. NunnLugar is now more flexible to meet unexpected threats in locations around the world. It has the authority to spend 10% of its budget on what they call notwithstanding authority. Notwithstanding authority allows efforts to be spent in any country, regardless of whether that country is on a terrorist list or not a terrorist list. It is now working beyond Russia and the former Soviet Union, and it's now going to focus a lot more work on biosecurity. Next page. There are also a number of new challenges. One, there are many new platforms. There are many new mechanisms in which we're trying to address these many new threats. There are many more activities, as I mentioned already. Biosecurity, nuclear radiological security, border security, Security Council resolutions, the Nuclear Security Summit. It's a different and unfamiliar landscape for a lot of countries. Where do we go first? What do we fund first? Do we do biosecurity in Africa? Do we do nuclear security in Asia? How much is it going to cost? A lot of these issues have to be addressed. Funding concerns. It's a tight world out there in terms of funding. How do we do all these efforts with a tighter budget? There is the challenge of integrating more international organizations into the threat issue. Coordination, a big issue. How do we assess the impact of some of these new threats and some of these new activities? There's threat fatigue. Some constituencies around the world challenge whether some of these threats exist. And there's sustainability. How do we make sure that these activities and what we do are sustained? Next page. Next one. So what are some of the current activities in which the U.S. is engaged globally to combat WMD terrorism? And how are the themes I noted reflected in current activities? Next page. The first one we're going to look at is a global initiative to combat nuclear terrorism. This is a forum that now has 80 partners. And when I say partners, I'm referring to countries. The goal of the GICNT is to strengthen global capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to nuclear terrorism by conducting multilateral activities. It seeks to improve the implementation and coordination of existing national and multilateral programs aimed at curtailing nuclear trafficking and avoiding duplication and demonstrating resolve. By building the capacity of willing partners so they can combat nuclear terrorism on a determined and systematic basis, the initiative seeks to eliminate domestic operational or technical challenges that impede the fight against nuclear terrorism. The GICNT is co-chaired by both the U.S. and Russia and was started in 2006. Last month, they had a meeting of the GICNT. They have an annual meeting every year in addition to a number of other meetings where they agreed upon a number of new initiatives. One of the things they want to focus a lot on is something called nuclear forensics, which allows you to be able to determine where, if there's a nuclear incident, where the incident may have started from, where the nuclear material may have originated. They do a number of activities, including exercises, to improve collective abilities to share information and assess a complex radiological nuclear threat. They have symposiums to detect the detection on special nuclear material, to discuss several detection techniques and materials, as well as highlight the importance of government, academia, and industry working closely together to maximize potential for enhanced nuclear detection capabilities. And they host a number of workshops. Next is the Proliferation Security Initiative. This is also a global effort that aims to stop trafficking of WMD, their delivery systems, and related materials to and from state and non-state actors of proliferation concern. It seeks the cooperation of any state whose vessels, flags, ports, territorial waters, airspace, or land might be used by proliferation purposes by states or non-state actors. It was launched in 2003 and now has 97 partners. It uses an innovative and proactive approach that relies on voluntary actions taken by states consistent with their national legal authorities and relevant international law and frameworks. Nations meet regularly in the context of exercises, expert meetings, and plenary sessions in various world capitals. It tests and develops cooperative procedures that would minimize or detect the transportation and smuggling of weapons of mass destruction. They are working now to increase activities around the globe, including in Africa, in South Africa, and Asia. Next one, please. Nuclear smuggling. There's a number of programs that are at the Department of State. One is the Nuclear Smuggling Outreach Initiative. This builds partnerships with key countries around the world to combat the global threat of nuclear smuggling in order to address the problem in a comprehensive way. It assists nations with nuclear source materials or who pose a high risk for nuclear smuggling to improve their capabilities in preventing, detecting, and responding to incidents. It works with bilateral partners most affected by the threat to develop joint action plans specifying priority steps to improve capabilities. It sends an interagency assessment team to partner countries to conduct a vigorous assessment of the nation's existing capabilities and regulations pertaining to nuclear smuggling. The assessment team investigates country-specific risk and engages with officials from the at-risk nation. Together, they determine precise needs and requirements outlined in their joint assessment. A joint action plan is then created, outlining specific gaps and tailored projects which will address the shortcomings in the state's anti-smuggling capacity. As the at-risk countries begins its own efforts to address the items on the list, the Nuclear Smuggling Outreach Initiative engages and matches external donors, both within the U.S. and outside the government, to run projects that will help the at-risk countries. Moving on to the preventing nuclear smuggling. This effort is to promote international nuclear forensic cooperation through national nuclear forensics libraries. Nuclear forensics is a technical means by which nuclear materials, whether intercepted, intact, or retrieved from post-explosion debris, are characterized as to composition, physical condition, age, and history, and interpreted such as industrial history and implications for nuclear device design. It can provide evidence for determining the history of the sample material and runs into, unfortunately, the controversial issue of attribution. It works with countries to improve anti-nuclear smuggling and nuclear forensics capabilities by providing funding for individuals to participate in a number of international workshops. It addresses the critical gaps in the capabilities of partner nations to combat smuggling in nuclear and radiological materials. Finally, the Nuclear Trafficking Response Group. It coordinates U.S. government response to incidents of illicit trafficking in nuclear and radioactive materials. It works with foreign governments to secure smuggled nuclear material, including facilities where diversions occurred, to prosecute those involved and develop information on smuggled-related threats. It works closely with law enforcement as well as scientists overseas to ensure a process for tracking smuggled materials. Next slide. Moving on to another area that has increased importance is export controls and related border security issues. The EXPIS program bolsters partner countries' capabilities to detect and interdict illicit transfers of strategic items, radioactive materials, and other WMD components, as well as advanced conventional weapons. It provides extensive training on strategic trade control legislation, licensing, enforcement, and government industry outreach and interagency coordination, as well as donates inspection and detection equipment to frontline enforcement agencies. It takes a regional and multilateral approach to help harmonize the recipient country's export control regimes with international standards while fostering greater information sharing. Next page. Chemical security engagement. The Chemical Security Engagement Program, also at the State Department, seeks to reduce the threat of chemical terrorism by preventing terrorists' access to chemical weapons and their precursors, toxic industrial chemicals, and dual-use infrastructure. It seeks to raise awareness about the multi-use nature of chemicals, promote laboratory best practices, and prevent sabotage or an accidental release at a chemical industrial facility. Its global engagement efforts support the U.S. chemical defense policy as well as international nonproliferation regimes. It works closely with host governments and international partner nations to identify needs and implement assistance to ensure safe, secure, and sustainable chemical laboratory best practices. It's working now in South and Southeast Asia, and will continue work toward establishing regional centers of excellence, significantly expand efforts in the Middle East and North Africa, and continue to grow new regional efforts in West and Sub-Saharan Africa. Moving on to bio. The Biological Engagement Security, the Biosecurity Engagement Program seeks to reduce the threat of bioterrorism by preventing terrorist access to potentially dangerous state biological material and dual-use infrastructure and expertise. It helps address global biosecurity risks from bioterrorism and infectious disease outbreaks through providing technical assistance, training, and workshops on strengthening biosafety and biosecurity capabilities, and developing safe, secure, and sustainable lab capacity building and national standards for comprehensive biological security. It deals in elements of, as I said, biosecurity and biosafety, but also, as I said, infectious disease, which is an increasingly important area today. This is also global work. It works in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and Latin America. Next, please. Another effort by the Department of State is called the Partnership for Nuclear Security. This effort establishes sustainable linkages between nuclear experts in priority countries and counterparts at U.S. and international institutions. It engages nuclear scientists, engineers, and technicians in collaborative research projects, raises awareness of government and nuclear technical community about the threat of proliferation, and encourages effective non-proliferation practices and policies. It improves nuclear safety and security best practices by providing opportunities for training to nuclear professionals through workshops, conferences, fellowships, and exchange programs, and related activities. Its work is in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa. It's launching efforts in the Middle East and North Africa now. Move next one. Actually, there's one before that, sorry. The Nuclear Facility Dismantlement and Disposal Project is training and equipment to help Iraq make preparations to dismantle and dispose of their former nuclear facilities. The program has been initiated by the Department of State to assist the government of Iraq in eliminating the threats from poorly controlled radioactive materials, while building human capacity so that the Iraqi government can manage other environmental cleanups in their country. The Department of State is funding the International Atomic Energy Agency to provide technical assistance on these projects. It's addressing the approximately 1,000 radioactive seal sources that are a problem in Iraq. The overall goal of the program is to safely dispose of the contaminated materials that were part of the former nuclear program in Iraq and develop the regulatory environment necessary to protect the citizens, workers, and future generations from the hazardous effects of the radiation. There are a couple more programs that deal with the Department of State are working on. One is called the Iraq Scientist Engagement Program, which engages former WD personnel in civilian activities with an emphasis on Iraq reconstruction efforts. It was established in 2003, and it seeks to minimize the terrorism and proliferation risks posed by Iraqi scientists, technicians, and engineers with weapons or weapons applicable expertise. It engages these individuals by sponsoring technical trainings, workshops, seminars, conferences, and grant competitions to promote peaceful civilian application of their skills. It also promotes safety and security best practices at Iraqi facilities and laboratories that produce, use, or store potentially dangerous or dual-use biological, chemical, or radiological materials. Finally, there's the Libya Scientist Engagement Program, which provides assistance in reorienting Libyan former WMD scientists towards civilian careers that can enhance Libya's economic development. The program seeks to reduce the proliferation risk of Libyan weapons of mass destruction expertise by supporting the transition of Libyan scientists, technicians, and engineers previously engaged in its WD program to civilian careers in a number of areas. Next one, please. Just very briefly talk about Security Council Resolution 1540. This was passed in 2004, and it obligates each UN member to adopt domestic controls to prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction. It prohibits support to non-state actors seeking such items. States must adopt effective laws in prohibiting the proliferation of such items to non-state actors. It was adopted under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, and it calls on all states to report their implementation of its status to the Security Council Committee. Since 2006, the number of states with laws prohibiting non-state actors from WMD activity has grown from 14 to 63, and it is still growing. It's helping to forge new relationships across bureaucracies, enhancing regulatory frameworks, and addressing the nexus between non-state actors and weapons of mass destruction. Next one, please. Security Council Resolution 1540 has high attention, very high level attention in the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is working to provide funding to assist other countries requiring financial need to fulfill their commitments. It is positive that there are numerous intergovernmental and non-governmental related meetings and gatherings that promote an international supportive dialogue on the issue. Next, please. Coming close to the end here, just a few more. The global partnership against the spread of weapons of mass destruction is a $20 billion two-year commitment by the G8 that was launched in 2002 with the aim of preventing terrorists and states from acquiring or developing WMD. It now has 23 parties, including the European Union, and it's been focused on two areas: destroying Russian nuclear submarines and Russian chemical weapons. The U.S. counts all of its CTR efforts in Russia and the former Soviet Union toward its commitment. Of the $20 billion that's been committed, the U.S. funds $10 billion of it. It's set to expire in 2012, and there are a number of goals we would like to have. Of course, we want to extend the partnership for another 10 years, for another $20 billion, but to also make it so that it's much more reflective of the threats of today. Next one, please. We want to bring in new partners. We want to have new activities that are global and focused, no longer focusing on Russia and the former Soviet Union. We'd like to have new activities such as biosecurity, border security, UN Security Council Resolution 1540 implementation, and of course, radiological and nuclear security of facilities. There was a meeting in June of the G8 summit in which the experts said that they would like to have an evaluation of the results of the GP, that they would like to focus on nuclear and radiological security, biosecurity, and scientist engagement, and 1540, so we were able to get the things that we thought were important. It reiterated the need to prepare for the potential participation of new countries and acknowledged that the threat posed by WMD is ongoing, and the work to prevent the spread of it will continue for years. Next one, please. Next one. Just go back for a second, just to show who the partners for the G8 Global Partnership is right now. Okay, next. Forward. I just wanted to just say very briefly about the Department of Defense. I already noted that they have new legislation to do work outside Russia and the former Soviet Union, but one of the big things you're going to be seeing is that they're going to be doing a lot more work on bioengagement and biosecurity work, which they have not done a lot of traditionally. And this is because there's been a recognition in the U.S. government of the new threats posed by bio and life sciences issues. So they're going to be doing a lot more on this issue in the future. Next. Just very briefly about the Department of Energy, I won't go through this in detail. Just want to mention that there are a number of programs. One is called the Global Threat Reduction Initiative, which is an initiative to try to, it's really the focus of trying to secure all vulnerable nuclear material by securing the material at the source, by converting reactors that use highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium, and you need highly enriched uranium to develop nuclear weapons. To actually remove the material, which is probably the best way to secure a facility, is to get rid of it. Don't even have to worry about threats and terrorists getting their hands on it. And they're active in over 90 countries, I believe, working on these projects. The MPCNA program, the Material Protection Program, essentially is a program that really is the source of securing the material at facilities. This is something DOE has been doing for a number of years. And they've done a lot of work, of course, in Russia and former Soviet Union so far, but they'll also be doing a lot more work outside Russia and former Soviet Union. Next one. The Border Security Program that DOE has, it actually puts radiation monitors at a number of land borders, at seaports, all points of entry. It's a global program that they've been working on. Then you have the International Nuclear Safeguards and Engagement Program, which enhances safeguards by improving the correctness and completeness of member states' declarations of nuclear material and facilities, thereby reducing the likelihood of theft. There's a prediction that about 60 countries are considering nuclear power to meet growing energy demands, which increase the burden of an already strained safeguard system. These newcomer countries will require training and expertise to ensure that nuclear technology are used in accordance with international nonproliferation obligations. To facilitate the safe and secure global expansion of nuclear energy, this program works with states to strengthen safeguards in existing nuclear facilities around the globe. This is a program that's really working directly with the new increase in countries that want to develop nuclear power to make sure that it's done safe and securely. Next, please. I'm going to finish by talking about the nuclear summit. One of my jobs at the Department of State is I'm the State Department rep to the NSC White House working on the Nuclear Security Summit. As I think probably most of you know, there was a summit in April, this past April. 47 countries were invited, 3 international organizations. The IAEA, the UN was there, the European Union was there. And there were a number of positive outcomes from the summit. There was a communique that was agreed to and was signed by all the participants that basically that a consensus that the danger of nuclear terrorism is one of the greatest threats to our collective security. They agreed that terrorist networks have tried to acquire the material for nuclear weapons, and if they succeed, they will use it. And were they to do so, it would be a catastrophe for the world, causing extraordinary loss of life and striking a major blow to global peace and stability. So all these countries that were part of the summit agreed to this. The outcomes, as I said, there was a communique. There's a work plan that came from that, which actually details for the national and international actions that the countries must take. There were a number of national statements that were made, and there were a number of bilateral meetings that were held by Obama and his colleagues and his counterparts around the world. Okay. Okay, next. If anyone has questions about the summit, we can talk about that later. Okay. Finally, the 4-year effort to secure all vulnerable nuclear material. This was what was really launched by the Nuclear Security Summit. The summit, of course, was a one-day event. We'll be having another summit in 2012 in South Korea. But really what's following that is a 4-year effort to secure all vulnerable nuclear material, which is really being led by the Department of Energy. And I talked about the Global Threat Reduction Initiative, their effort to secure material, to remove nuclear material from facilities, to convert reactors so they cannot make the type of nuclear material that can be used for nuclear weapons. This is an effort that President Obama announced when he was in Prague in 2009. And what the Nuclear Summit really did was bring high-level attention and focus on this effort and to get buy-in from a number of countries to actually dedicate themselves to securing vulnerable nuclear material in the next 4 years. Next, please. And that's it. So those, I think, are all, I can't say they're all the programs. There's programs in Department of Commerce, there's programs in DHS, there's programs in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But this gives you a flavor of the type of CTR activities that are ongoing now. And it gives you a flavor how it's changed from when it started in 1992, just focused on Russia and former Soviet Union, focused on large projects, to how it's evolved to global effort around the world, with focusing on non-state actors, with a number of new type of activities that we have today. So, open for questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jenkins. So those who'd like to ask questions, I ask you to come to the center of the room where you'll find a mic. Yes, you, sir.
I am James Hamilton from King's College. My question is, how do you see the relationship between the cooperative threat reduction programs and the other multilateral initiatives like 1540? And do you see them as complementary, or do you see the multilateral initiatives as ineffective and therefore needs cooperative threat reduction? And I believe the G8 voted not to renew their global partnership when they last met. Your thoughts on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
All of these efforts really should work together, and that's one of the goals we have. And if you have a chance to look at the work plan from the Nuclear Security Summit, you'll see that in it there's a number of activities that states will be taking to ensure that nuclear material are secure. And in it you'll see things like 1540, you see the G8 Global Partnership, you see the Global Initiative, you see nuclear forensics. You'll see how all of these efforts are really supposed to be working together to achieve the goal of nuclear security. And that's an example of how we see all these efforts working together. I will say it's a lot, and when I go overseas and talk with officials, they do say, well, there's a lot going on. You know, there's so many things happening. But one of the things that we wanted to do with the summit and the work plan was to show that there is a way in which all these things have to work together. Including with 1540, because 1540 has a lot of language that deals with export controls, for example. So the export control folks work closely with the 1540 folks. There's things in there that deal with nuclear smuggling, with the Proliferation Security Initiative, talking about that. So we have people that actually work together on these issues because they are connected. So we do see them as working together very closely. The G8 summit, we did not get the renewal this year, the extension this year. As you probably know, we have 2 years to get it. We wanted to start early because we wanted to give countries an opportunity to get their budgets together if they need to get budgets to plan ahead for 2012. Canada was chair this year of the G8. They were chair when the G8 Global Partnership started, because it was a symbolic for them to be chair again when we had extension. But we have 2 more years. So France chairs the G8 next year. I'm going to be traveling over to France in September to start talking with them about the game plan next year for trying to ensure extension of the global partnership. In 2012, the U.S. chairs the G8. Hopefully we'll have it by then, but we have 2 years in which to get it. And I think the decisions that were made at the last G8, I think were a big step forward because they recognize the 4 new areas we want to focus on: nuclear and radiological security, bioengagement, 1540, and biosecurity. And they recognize that the threats are going to exist for a number of years. They said years, and that we need to work together as partners to address those threats. So it's a very big step in the right direction.
Hi, I just wanted to know, for all these programs, which countries or organizations are the main financial contributors, or where do these organizations get the funding from?
There are those that are major contributors and those who are very instrumental. Obviously, the U.S., the U.K., Canada, the ROK is doing a lot. Australia, New Zealand, let's see, Norway, Japan, France. So you have a number who are the traditional players, but you're starting to see a lot of other countries want to play a much larger role in these issues, so which is a good thing. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I think being presented with all of these programs is kind of reassuring, seeing how many people are working on reducing the threat of nuclear terrorism and these sorts of things. Since funding seems to be a problem with having so many organizations, what sorts of things do you do to tell the average American about these programs, to sort of encourage them to vote for representatives supporting your organizations and those sorts of things? Is there sort of a disconnect? Because a lot of these things seem completely new to me, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much is being done. Right.
You're right. Most people don't know what's being done. I mean, it's one of my purposes here is, and when I talk to audiences, is just to let them know there's a lot going on that's under the radar screen that you're not aware of, that the government's engaged in both, domestically, of course, but internationally to try to deal with these issues. And it's an interesting situation because we have been blessed by having a senator who cares a lot about this. And having Senator Nunn there has been very helpful because we've always gotten an increase in funding every year since it started. Now the question will be what happens when Senator Lugar's not there anymore. You don't have the champion, and we can hope that it's picked up. Now, when President Obama was a senator, he was also very much engaged on these issues. He talked a lot to Senator Lugar about CTR and all these efforts, so he knew a lot about this before he became president. But he's not in the Senate anymore either. We've been blessed in the sense that it's been an issue that it's hard to argue against in the Congress. I mean, it's hard to argue against wanting to secure weapons, wanting to train scientists. I mean, the argument sometimes is how do you prove the success when it comes to things like scientist engagement. But when you're talking about big projects, it's not hard to show why they're successful, why you should do it. So we've been very lucky. We've been very lucky, and we've been able to get the funding that we need. We haven't had the need to go out and convince the constituency around the U.S. about it because, quite frankly, a lot of constituencies don't want to hear about these things. But they're more than happy to let Washington handle some of these less sexy areas. But we've been lucky. And so the question will be, one, what happens when Lugar's not there anymore? Two, since a lot of these programs now are less the big ticket destruction items, we'll still be doing that. But you have a lot more diffuse work, smaller projects, securing pathogens here, working with scientists there. How will we sell that to the Hill as important and measurable? And that'll be a challenge as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello again, Ambassador. Thank you for coming. I'm Christopher Brownfield, a participant in the Hertog Global Strategy Initiative. My question is, how does the threat reduction work with countries like India and Pakistan, who are not part of the G8? They are in the G20, but they're not really in any sort of framework that's dealing with other non-proliferation issues, since they're not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I'd like to ask this question with particular emphasis toward the recent U.S.-India nuclear agreements, where we have agreements for civilian nuclear fuel, and it seems strange to me that they aren't part of the direct engagement for cooperative threat reduction. Also, I'd like to point out that the Foreign Minister for Pakistan requested similar civilian nuclear deal from Secretary Clinton, who responded very bluntly, no, we are not going to cooperate with you on civilian nuclear matters, even though Pakistan seems to be a very important partner in the U.S. war in Afghanistan. So I'd like if you could address some of these issues about the seeming lack of cooperation with India and Pakistan on one hand, and the need for engagement with them on the other. Thank you.
Well, there are CTR type things that go on with India and Pakistan. We're starting to get more engaged with them on some of the bio issues. At the Nuclear Security Summit, India and China announced that they're going to set up centers of excellence. And so we're working very closely with them on that. So there are things that we work with them on border security issues. And they belong to some of these other groups. I mean, they're not part of the G8, but they're part of some of the other groups out there. So they are engaged. There's just so many of them, it's hard to know which ones. But they are engaged, and some of the work that we are doing, whether it's in state or DOE or DOD or one of the other agencies, we are engaged in those countries. It just may not be as visible as some of the other ones. As far as the Pakistan issue, I can happily say that's not in my portfolio. But I do understand I understand the question you're asking. And it's not my issue, but I know that we do have relations with Pakistan on a number of issues. I don't believe the situation right now is ripe for that kind of an agreement with Pakistan. So that's why there has not been an agreement to have one. but we are working with them in other ways, in other contexts, and see what can happen in the future.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for the presentation. My name's Anne Lin. I'm a master's student from the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in Sydney, and I'm not at all specialized in that area, so I hope you'll forgive me for the candidness of my questions. One question I had was, in your presentation, you said that you were trying to re-affect the personnel in Iraq who were working on weapons of mass destructions. I thought there were no weapons of mass destructions found, so I was just seeking clarification. And my second question was, I'd like to know a bit more, in more detail, what the US are doing in their own country. I'm sorry, I'm French, so maybe that's why I'm more interested in that, what the United States is doing in their own country. In this respect, I recently read about an incident or a study on the population of Fallujah in Iraq, which showed very high levels of cancer and birth defects, which were higher than those found after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and which point to use of weapons, nuclear weapons, by the U.S., I suppose, in that context. So, if you could give some information.
We'll stay there, so I want to make sure I understand your second question. In the Iraq situation, these are scientists who were working in prior, when Iraq was working on WMD. So they are scientists who have knowledge. But it's also scientists who, there's two definitions. There's a scientist redirection and scientist engagement. Scientist redirection are scientists who at some point were working on WMD. And scientist engagement are scientists who have not been working on it but have the skills that they can use those skills for WMD. So it's both. And in Libya it's more of a redirection because there were scientists who worked on their program. And the second question, did you ask what we're doing in the U.S.?
Yes, I find that the U.S. seems to be very committed in this process, and you mentioned a lot of initiatives around the world working in particular risky countries, I suppose, especially where border control is concerned. But I suppose in thinking of nuclear risk reduction, you have two things. You have one, reducing the number of nuclear weapons, and that would include the U.S., who I think has a lot of nuclear weapons, and also preventing them from being used. And what I read recently about this study in Fallujah is that the U.S., it looks like, I don't think it's been completely asserted yet, but it looks like the U.S. has been using weapons of mass destruction themselves, nuclear weapons in Fallujah.
On the first one, as far as reducing nuclear weapons, I mean, that's been a very big part of President Obama's agenda. If you go back to the Prague speech, he talks about reduction of nuclear weapons, and he says, it may not ever happen in his lifetime, but there's no reason why we can't start the process of reducing nuclear weapons. So he's very committed to that, and a lot of the initiatives that he has started since he's been here, or strengthened since he's been here, is really to try to start the process, or at least to start the process where people can think it's possible. I think there's a feeling that it can never happen, but you have to at least start thinking it's possible, so you can start down the path.
So you said that, for instance, some of the Russian nuclear submarines were dismantled. Do you have any such examples in the U.S. of achievement?
Quite frankly, I'm not sure how we're doing our nuclear submarines. I'm pretty sure we don't have nearly as many as we used to have because they're not as practical. So without knowing the details of how many we have, I'm pretty sure we don't have that many. We probably destroy some of our own. A lot of times things are done we try to have some kind of evenness, but I don't know for sure.
Yes?
No.
Sorry. Do you have any information on use of nuclear weapons by the military?
I don't have any information on that.
Are you referring to use of depleted uranium shells? I think, depleted uranium is used in U.S. ordnance, and there are, questions as to the health consequences. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I was asking about the use of nuclear weapons in U.S. policy.
But these aren't. I mean, these are not nuclear weapons in the sense that they're not, you know, triggering nuclear reactions, you know, nuclear explosions. They're using, you know, depleted uranium in ordnance because it's particularly dense and it's effective against, you know, armor, et cetera. So I just want to make sure I understand.
So it's not in the category of weapons of mass destruction. Is that what you're saying? It doesn't fall in that category?
The term
Depleted,
itself.
no, not.
Sorry, I'm not knowledgeable on that topic at all, obviously. So.
Okay. All right. I mean.
No, it's not. I mean, it wouldn't be considered weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Not that. Not what he's talking about. No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador. Thanks for speaking with us. It's actually a related question, but it's on a policy level. Hans Blix, who spoke with this group at the beginning of the summer, recently mentioned in print that he felt that the United States was, quote, high on military in 2002 and 2003 with the release of its national security strategy and the resultant U.S.-led invasion of Iraq on the basis of WMD. Graham Allison, who also spoke with us, said that that invasion and the lack of underlying justification was the greatest cost was, in fact, the destabilization of the region and other nuclear powers essentially perhaps accelerating their programs as a result of regime instability. So I would ask, as a result of the experience of the United States unilateralism in Iraq, how has the administration and how does the CTR 2.0 contemplate American unilateralism or potentially unilateralism by another power as a contributor to the global threat? What restrictions, if any, have been contemplated or put in place on the United States' future behavior to avoid additional unilateral adventures where perhaps a structure like this could be more effective?
Well, make sure I understand your question, but the CTR program is always based on, it's not really a unilateral program. Right. It can't be implemented in a unilateral way because everything that we do has to be done with the consent of the other country. So, we can't go into a country and force them to accept our securing of their facility, or we can't go into a country and force their scientists to listen to us about biosecurity. We can't force a country to secure their pathogens. It's always voluntary, and it has to be voluntary to work. Once it becomes involuntary, it's a different type of thing. So this doesn't really have a lot of connection with unilateralism per se. If anything, because of the multilateral nature of it, because of the benefits that you gain by working with other countries, the experiences that you share through these interactions, if anything, it works against unilateralism and it promotes more multilateral culture exchange and scientists who, you know, scientists always have their own language no matter where they're from. So it promotes that, and I think it works against any notions of unilateralism because of the very nature in which it's done and which it's implemented. So if anything, it could be used, it's seen more as a positive than as a negative, particularly since a lot of times we are coming in with the funding to help them. We're saying, you know, the situation of dangerous pathogens is a threat to everyone, and we would like to help you. And if they say no, we can't force them to accept it. But a lot of times we'll come in there with funding to help.
I guess just to clarify very specifically and shortly, with the United States showing financial leadership, showing conceptual leadership in this initiative, how has the United States represented itself as a forward-looking power, learning from whatever mistakes we may have made based on one's perception, to avoid participants themselves conducting themselves the way we did in 2003?
I think it's the way in which we carry ourselves. I think a lot of it's in the very nature of the way in which Obama has come in the office and the reception that he's received. I know I feel it whenever I travel overseas and I talk with other countries. There's a different perception about the United States, and I think not that they think we're great. I mean, we're not. I'm not going to say we're, you know, everyone thinks we're wonderful, but I could definitely say that the perception itself and the way in which we're seen, I think that helps a lot. And a lot of what you're saying and what you're talking about. So it's not always a particular program or particular thing you do. It's how you present yourself and how you work with other countries and the perception that they get from the way you are where you're not always you're being a partner. Like I said, you use the word partners a lot these days because that's how countries want to be seen. They want to be seen as partners. And there are times when they lean on the United States to be a leader, and they want us to be a leader, particularly in these areas. They felt there's been an absence of the United States in leadership in a lot of these WMD areas, and they welcome the United States leadership back in these areas. But it's also being a leader means sometimes being a follower. You can be a leader without being in front. So a lot of it's perception and how you present yourself.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your presentation. My name is Chao Zhu, come from DePaul University. As I'm Chinese, I'm really curious about one nation close to my country, which is a country, doing a lot of issue with nuclear weapons. That is North Korea. I listened to your presentation and I find a lot of program, but I didn't see a lot of specific focus on that nation. But actually, we hear a lot of things about what is going on in North Korea, what is going on about that country. And we also heard a lot about the Six Nations Conference between Russia, United States, China, Japan, North Korea, and South Korea. But it's kind of like people are getting tiring to hear about what is going on because North Korea is really unstable. They do one thing, they agree on one thing, and suddenly they change their mind. So do you see any possibility or new opportunities for United States, especially this perspective? I mean, to see, is there anything going on in the near future about the North Korea issue? Or United States will wait until some sudden change, or we all know that the great leader of that nation was trying to pass on the power to the next generation. So do you see any possibility of changing anything or new opportunities, or do United States have some new solution other than the Beijing conference result? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, to some degree, we are, as I mentioned earlier, these particular programs. There's a lot of platforms in which the U.S. is trying to deal with North Korea. Unfortunately, these particular programs, you need to have a country that's working with you. So these programs cannot really be implemented in North Korea until North Korea is open to these kind of programs. What I will say is that there was a point when we did have Department of Energy folks, Department of State folks in North Korea to dismantle some of their facilities. And then they kicked us out. And so we haven't been back. But we have funding that's still set aside for that. So as soon as that situation changes, we can send people right back. We've also, one thing that we did in the United States was trying to determine, as we talk about extending the global partnership for another 10 years, we had to think in terms of what would we do in the next 10 years? What would we be spending money on? And we did account for future work in North Korea. So we have been thinking in terms of it, putting aside funding, waiting for an opportunity to go back and do some of these kind of efforts in North Korea. But unfortunately, we're stuck until there is some kind of a change, until some of the other mechanism of the U.S. government and diplomacy can open up a possibility that we can come in and do what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. My name is Mohammed Wain from the Hertog Initiative. And I actually had a question about the impact of kind of these alternative non-proliferation regimes on the NPT as the cornerstone of international non-proliferation regime. In terms of these alternative measures and mechanisms undermining, obviously, that's going to be unintended consequences of these alternative regimes. And creating a situation where countries don't take the NPT seriously anymore. And I think the nuclear deal with India gives even more credence to such concerns, that now we have a gray area of countries that neither belong to the NPT nor do not belong there. And we've created kind of a halfway house for those types of countries. And I was wondering if in your thinking you think these, by not incorporating these alternative measures into the NPT, we're actually undermining that cornerstone regime.
I'm not sure how we would incorporate I mean, the NPT is as you're saying, it's been very successful in many ways, but it is fraught with a lot of problems, and it's almost, in a sense, it's almost its own entity because of the issues with disarmament and nonproliferation. And I can say, for example, when we were working on the Nuclear Security Summit, which was in April, and the NPT Review Conference, which was in May, I believe it was, there was always a need to keep the two separate, because we didn't want to have the unfortunate firestorms in the NPT, in the Nuclear Security Summit, because it was very important if you were going to have the countries that we had at the summit, including India, Pakistan, Egypt, Mexico, Brazil, Israel, who were all part of the Nuclear Security Summit, you had to keep it very, very focused on nuclear security, securing nuclear materials, something that no country could really argue against. But that highlights the fact that the NPT is a I don't want to say explosive because that's too big an emphasis, but it is its own entity, and it has its issues and it has its problems. So I think that if anything, some of these cooperative programs in which, for example, maybe the Center of Excellence in India may do something, I don't know, but maybe if these programs are an opportunity for countries to interact. And anytime you have that kind of interaction and working together, there could be positive effects in many areas, maybe in the NPT as well. But you're right. I mean, the NPT is a kind of its own entity in a sense, and so it's you have to deal with them in certain ways in order to make things work.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that
Yes.
very quickly, because I have this feeling that the power of the NPT comes from the fact that not being a member to the NPT is associated with some sort of normative stigma. And I think by creating these alternative mechanisms, we kind of undermine that normative, power of the NPT. So you might be not a member to the NPT, but make up for that non-membership through, being part of these other alternative non-proliferation regimes.
I'm not so sure that that's the way it's seen. I'm not so sure that the NPT parties would say that, well, because Pakistan or India is a part of one of these regimes, that somehow is okay, or if a country that's part of the NPT, that's a problem country, is part of another regime, that's somehow reduces the fact that they're a problem in the NPT. I'm not sure that people see that way. I mean, it could be the case, but I don't think that in the NPT review conference that they had in May, that anybody would say to a problem country, you're part of these other regimes, so it's okay, we're not going to give you as much as a hard time. I don't think that's the case. I think the NPT is its own entity, and it's talking about getting rid of nuclear weapons, it's talking about the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and that's an issue that we've been dealing with for, since the 40s. So I don't think that these in any way takes away from the obligations that countries have in the NPT. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Ambassador, thanks for your service in the Navy and the State Department. My name is Alex Leach, just finished a grad program at LSC. I have two questions for you. First, out of all these threats, which one sort of keeps you up at night, either based on likelihood or total impact that it might cause? And the second one is, what sort of bureaucratic challenge do you think is the biggest that you deal with day to day inside the U.S. government in keeping these disasters from occurring?
What keeps me up at night? Actually, I sleep pretty well. I think if these would bother me that much, I probably would be doing it. But I guess maybe biosecurity, more so, because one of the biggest questions everyone always asks is how come there hasn't been a biological attack anywhere? I mean, of a real significance in recent years. With nuclear weapons, you have to have the material, you have to have the facilities, you have to have a number of things to actually make a weapon. You can make a dirty bomb a lot easier, of course, because radiological materials are more accessible. But biological is a dual-use entity where, scientists have the ability, they have the knowledge to do very good or very bad with the same skills. It's not as easy, of course, to do it as one would think, because I'm not a biologist and my colleague is over there, but I know, there's certain things about temperature and all that have an effect on how biological pathogens can really affect a large number of people, but it does make me wonder why it hasn't happened. And you don't want to ask the question. You don't want to ask other people the question. People do ask the question, but it makes me wonder why that hasn't happened, and that scares me because it's the type of thing that can spread before people know what's wrong or what caused it. If you see any of these movies that they've made on biological terrorism, there was one with Dustin Hoffman, I think it was called Outbreak, that was made a number of years ago. And if you see that movie, you get a real sense of how dangerous it could be. And it could be a naturally occurring disease, and that's the other thing. It doesn't have to be an intentional threat to somebody, an intentional biological effort. It could be a naturally occurring disease that happens, and it could have the same effect. So it's that's what I think is probably more scary to me. The bureaucratic challenges, time, very, very basic things. There's time. There's personnel, not having enough people to do these issues, to work on these issues. Understanding the number of organizations that are engaged in these issues, trying to get a sense of the lay of the land has been a challenge. There has been very good interagency coordination overall between among the different agencies. That's been developed through the years since 1992, and that's good because it wasn't always that way. I think when it started, there were a lot of bureaucratic fights, I think, between DOD and DOE. State Department hardly ever gets money, so we're not really we're not really in the fight. Though we do lead all the international work, but that's a lot better now, but it can always be improved. And one of my jobs is to find out ways in which to improve it. But it's basic stuff. It's not only that. It's not only the huge actors involved in CTR, but there's never enough people. There's never enough funds to do the work, and just not enough time. It's a lot. We're doing a lot.
Could I ask a follow-up
Sure.
on those two questions? The first, in regards to biosecurity, as you point out, it can be difficult, to separate out the threat of naturally occurring pathogens from a bioweapon that would be, built to kill people. But do you have any concern about the way that issues of public health might be defined as national security issues? There's a long debate among people who work on environmental policy and environmental scarcities about how it is when you characterize something like environmental change or environmental scarcity as a national security threat that has all kinds of implications in terms of how you deal with that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a question I'd be curious to hear you respond to. The other one I'll wait for, but go ahead on that.
No, I think you're right. I think when you put a security lens on something, it does change it. And, well, it brings in different actors, and it brings in different specialists, and sometimes individuals who have never worked together before. It brings in, and then, there's all types of sensitivities that arise, turf battles that arise, funding issues that arise. And there is a certain, when you say security, it's then you think threat, and scientists who may be doing something because they feel like they're doing it for the betterment of health in the United States. When you put the threat lens on it, changes it in a certain way, and it's seen as more of a negative, in a sense. So I think there's a reluctance to do that to some degree. I know in the bio area, we've been State Department has been funding CDC and Department of Agriculture to do work in overseas because they don't really have a budget to do biosecurity type work. And we think that might change, and they may actually start getting a budget to focus on biosecurity issues. So it's still in its infancy in terms of that, and I'm sure it's true in some of the other areas as well, environmental or whatever, that when you put the security lens, it just changed the perception of it. Though at one point, when security was the big thing, there was an attraction to it because you got more money from the government because everything was security, security. But it does change it.
That anticipates my second question. There was a series in the Washington Post recently about the business of Homeland Security, how it's become a big business, many thousands of people making a living from it. And many of them making a better living in the private sector, as usual, than they used to make in government. Is that a concern for you, the privatization of important national security programs in even policymaking, and also the competition for talent? When there are private sector, when there's private sector demand for the talents that the government needs as well, if only to deal with all the beltway bandits, if you will?
I would say that not so much for me, because in my world, I'm not really dealing with a lot of private sector folks. DHS probably has a lot more of a concern with that, but most of my world is international. Most of the private, if you call them private, would be individuals come from Department of Energy national laboratories like Sandia, Los Alamos. So they're not really independent because they're also funded by the government, but they're not in D.C. They're, Sandia in California or Santa Fe. But in my world, I don't really deal with that in terms of a competition with them. But there may be situations where, for some reason, the government is not able. Because one thing that some of the private sectors can do is they can take a longer look at some issues. Because in the government, everything it's so busy that sitting back and looking at things strategically, you don't have a lot of time to do that. And sometimes you have folks from outside do some of that for you and look at things in a much more of a strategic level and come back and give you some ideas and some thoughts. And that's what some of these labs, these Department of Energy laboratories do for DOE, is they're able to do that. They're able to look at, not only do they do a lot of the technical work, the scientific technical work, but they are able to sit back and give a strategic view on policy or whatever that a lot of times you just don't have the time to do on an everyday basis in the government.
Okay.
Ambassador, what do you think the administration's assessment of and thinking about the threat of the expansion of nuclear energy worldwide? The White House itself estimates that the number of nuclear reactors globally will double by mid-century, and that this will carry lots of proliferation risks. But at the same time, President Obama's Blue Ribbon Commission is relooking at the reprocessing issue domestically, and nuclear energy is going to be needed by growing powers that are growing economically and that want to lower their carbon emissions in order to meet mitigation goals to prevent global climate change.
If there was a way to deal with the energy problems we have today in the world without doing it through nuclear energy, that would be great. Simply because nuclear energy, by building nuclear energy and nuclear power, using nuclear energy and building nuclear power, gives you the skills and the facility to build nuclear weapons. You need facilities, you need materials and stuff, but still it gives you the basic knowledge to do it. But it's a right of every country. Every country has a right to do it. So you can't tell countries they can't do that. So the issue is how do you ensure that countries do that in a way that's in a non-proliferation way. And one of the programs I was talking about that DOE does is just that. It works with countries that want to develop nuclear power and help them understand how to do it safe and secure and aware of non-proliferation concerns and threats that having all this nuclear power does create. So countries have the right to do it. You can't say they can't do it. It's just how do you do it in a managed way is a real issue. So.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name is John Koch. I follow Korean affairs closely, and there's a connection between the previous comment and your presentation involving the Proliferation Security Initiative, which I'd like you to comment on. And here's the gist of what is involved. The It's my understanding that the Proliferation Security Initiative presaged some of the harsher sanctions imposed recently against North Korea, which mandate states to inspect cargoes for military shipments and WMDs and so forth. Now, the participants in that initiative did not include South Korea initially, because the government in South Korea didn't want to offend the North. But the new government of President Lee Myung-bak has distinguished the government of Roh Moo-young, has signed on, and I think they signed on even before the recent attack against the North Korean ship. So here's my question. Here you have an example of a participant which changes its position with a change in regime, with a change of administration, and it can work the other way. So you have players joining or abstaining depending on their national interests. So how do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, yes, the ROK is joining the Proliferation Security Initiative, so that's true. That's something that you really can't control, and for the most part, overall, that doesn't happen. For the most part, when countries join these regimes, they pretty much stay in them. But because we're talking about 90 countries or so. But if a regime change and they pull out, all you can really do is engage with them to try to stay involved. And if they pull out of this, they may pull out of a lot of other things. And so your diplomacy with that country would really focus on staying engaged in these efforts, and that's how and your diplomacy for that country would adjust to the change in what they do. Yeah, you're right. It does. Definitely does.
I think this will be the last question.
Thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. With the non-traditional security become more and more important nowadays, especially the energy and climate change threat not only the United States but also the whole world. So
sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. Just I can't.
The energy security and climate change threat not only the United States but all the world. I'd like to ask a question about the what the United States what policy adopted by the United States in the energy and climate change field, and what's the multilateral cooperation to the energy security threatening nowadays? Thank you.
Which one was that? The second one was that?
Second one, what's the multilateral cooperation to the energy security threat?
I can't understand. Was that which threat?
I guess, are you asking her to speak to U.S. policy on climate change and alternative energies?
Right.
The non-traditional.
Trying to do this
threats.
in a multilateral way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Non-traditional threats.
Yeah.
And climate change. Well, the non-traditional threats. Are you talking about just non-traditional threats in general, or just climate change? I mean, in terms of, I mean, I'm not going to speak to the climate change issue because that's so out of my out of my portfolio. But non-traditional threats, it depends on how you're defining them. I mean, if you're talking about the kind that I work with, then these are the ways in which we're trying to deal with them. We just have a number of mechanisms that exist that try to. I mean, we almost have a mechanism for almost everything that's out there. We have a mechanism to interdict. We have a mechanism for nuclear forensics. To if you blow something up, we're trying to figure out where it came from. You have a mechanism to secure the materials at the source. You have a mechanism to secure them at the borders, whether they're WD in general. So, in terms of the issues I work on, there's pretty much a mechanism for almost every path that materials, for example, nuclear materials can go from a facility into the hands of a terrorist, and then getting the materials out of the hands of the terrorist. So we kind of have everything covered in all the different areas. You just have to belong to some of them. But if you're talking about it in that respect, we have programs that deal with non-traditional threats in terms of anything that's WMD related. Climate change, that's not my area, so I can't really answer that one.
All right. Well, you've already got a full plate.
I can read about it and tell you that.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ambassador Jenkins.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming.